Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name's Andy Marlowe. I am one of the outgoing directors of the Australian Passive House Association, also certified passive house designer and an architect. We're here this afternoon to hear from Dr. Kevin Yee. He is one of the key people in the BASIX team here in New South Wales, and he's here to talk about how the Passive House standard is now recognised by BASIX in meeting compliance with the state legislation here in New South Wales. We being APHA are very pleased and excited that this event has occurred in terms of the recognition. It's been a long time coming, and we think it's going to be one of the many game changers in the next few years as Passive House really takes off. I could talk all day about that, but I won't, and we'll let Kevin explain what these changes really mean, how they work, and if you could put your questions into the chat function as we go along, and we'll deal with them maybe as we go along, maybe at the end, we'll see how it goes, but do put them in there as they come to your mind, and we'll make sure that they do all get answered. Thanks very much, and on that note, over to you, Kevin.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Andy, for the introduction, and thanks for having me here. It's a good opportunity. I'm equally as excited about Passive House standard being recognized in BASIX. I think, yes, it's a somewhat a long time coming, but you know, and it's still actually not ended yet. It still is, I will explain a bit later. There's still some more work along the way. So this is just a snapshot I'm going to go through with you today. And firstly, I'll cover why we are doing this, why we actually recognize Passive House standard in BASIX. And as I said, it is still a bit of a work in progress. So I'll kind of outline to you what is coming next. And then I'll do a bit of a demonstration to show you how, in case you haven't logged into the BASIX tool and then see what is actually asked of you, what you need to go through, and what is the requirements that both paperwork and process and everything else that you need to actually comply with the BASIX requirements if you would like to select the Passive House standard pathway for your project or for your client's project. And there will be some, of course, Q&A, and I think depends on the questions. I'm happy to answer them along the way or towards the end. I will probably, you know, it depends on the nature of questions, and if there are any other questions that I could answer, probably I'll, Andy, feel free to probably prompt me, then I'll answer those questions being raised. So without further ado, that is a bit of a background of BASIX, just in case you are not familiar with the regulatory requirements in New South Wales. And I would like to probably stress that the Passive House, the recognition of Passive House, mostly affects the thermal comfort requirements. Well, of course, no surprise there, and it would affect the energy requirements in terms of ventilation. I will probably provide a bit more details later, and it is applicable to new dwelling projects for the time being. Then, of course, that's why I mentioned there will be a, you know, a work in progress, whether it is for new homes or new houses, or when it is going to apply to apartment buildings and so on. So just want to kind of lay the seed there for a couple of minutes. Okay, why are we doing this? Well, I feel I'm preaching to the converted because the Passive House standard works. And I think one of the statements from your chair of the Passive House Association, Paul, which sums up pretty well. It's actually the Passive House standard from the evidence that we can see. It can, I would say, deliver comfort to the occupants, reduce the bills for the home, and equally as importantly is the air tightness, which will address the condensation issues as well, and drafts and condensation issues. And from the technical point of view, it works, and we are not, of course, we are not, you know, and that is probably something that at least is worth the merits of actually recognizing BASIX. And from the user's point of view, and actually recognition of Passive House standard also provides the flexibility And for the thermal comfort section point of view, is probably the history, and one can say the regulatory policy, the kind of thing. It is largely based on the NatHERS scheme and whatever definitions or the algorithm they've been using. And we are aware that we need to provide flexibility to the sector. So we are not really picking any particular winner. And that means we are not exclusively, just dedicated to NatHERS. And that's why even before the passive house standard, we provide for, at least for detached homes, another pathway called the do-it-yourself, which is, similar to the deemed to satisfy elemental provisions in the building code, at least in concept. So, the recognition of the passive house standard is just to demonstrate we want to improve the provide more flexibility to the practitioners such as yourself. And of course, in terms of the energy section, it is one of those, I would say, the feedback from the industry, in particular, through Andy, from your peers in the association as well, is that the current ventilation options in the energy section doesn't take into account of that mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. A lot of cases, users need to resort to actually selecting ventilation with a continuous operation, 24 hours, which in some sense, which kind of, kind of shortchanging the benefits of that system in relation to probably benefits in terms of energy consumption, or even broader benefits in terms of comfort and bill savings as a whole. So I think through the recognition of the passive house standard, we provide also flexibility in that sense. Even BASIX is set up as a minimum standard. We actually don't want everyone just to have designs that achieve the minimum standard. We want to recognize better performance as well. And that's why recognition of the passive house standard provides or drives that design innovation to have designs that are actually way better than the minimum standard. And also the passive house standard also improve the efficiency from users such as you. And instead of actually having to do the double data entry or one other entry for the modeling work for passive house software and other for BASIX, we want to streamline the process so that you can hopefully you can just do, reduce at least the amounts of data entry, if not just doing one set of data entry. So these are why we are doing it, where we are coming from, and hopefully, through time, those benefits will be realized as well. And as I said, we are trying to do it kind of stage-wise. It is still a work in progress. Currently, passive house standard is only available for houses, which is your detached dwellings, single dwelling projects in BASIX terms. And we are actually trying to roll that out for apartment buildings, meaning the multiple dwelling projects in BASIX speak, early next year. That will be the next the updates we are trying to schedule in the first early next year. So in the meantime, and actually it provides a good opportunity with this two-stage approach. It provides the opportunity to make some improvements along the way, gathering feedback from you guys, from now, which is already recognized for houses. What other, improvements that we can include in the next release while we are doing that for apartment buildings. Some of them, could be wording, wording-wise, the commitments wording and everything, and also the process as well. And actually, I would probably elaborate these 2 points on the slides later about the heating and cooling loads, how it affects the energy section, and also, what it means if we are going to increase the stringency for BASIX thermal comforts to align with what they're proposing currently in the NCC for 2022, 7 stars presumably. Then what actually the implications from there. Not just for the release next year, but also probably down the track, we would like to actually get more information or evidence from you guys as well on these two. Like I say, I'll elaborate more in the next half hour or so, or 40 minutes or so. So I think the time is about right to do a bit of a demonstration. Okay, so I have just logged onto the BASIX screen, BASIX tool. Hopefully you guys can see the BASIX screen that I have. Probably Andy, can you confirm that if you can?
Yep, all looks good from here.
Okay. All right, thank you. So I'll just go back to there. Okay, so this is the log, the screen from a BASIX tool. You can see all the projects. So then, of course, it's just like those cooking shows. I've prepared some projects early for the demonstration. Just to start off, currently the passive house standard option is only applicable to postcodes where there's actually I would say climate files data, and I think there's still also within that a particular, is it 250-kilometer radius or whatever from that weather stations, where the climate files will be available for the passive house software package. So I'm aware that Broken Hill is one of those areas where the climate file data is not available. So I just prepare a project for that. And in theory, currently the passive house option should not be available. So if I quickly go to the thermal comfort section, for those postcodes where the passive house standard is not applicable because of that climate file or climate data issue, the selection is actually grayed out. You can't really select that standard. Either you make sure you enter the correct postcode where actually that the climate data is available. Alternatively, you might need to contact probably contact the association or your peers to sort out the climate files data to make sure that the data is available for the modeling. So I think this is one of the, I would say, limitations for now, based on I would like to flag upfront. But for those locations where there are climate files where you can actually do assessments with the passive house software package, then that option is available, which is this project I'm going to show. It is based on Mandy, which is available. Then you can have that option available to you. But of course, as we are aware that the person actually logging into the BASIX account and then doing a BASIX project may not be the one actually doing the passive house simulation. So meaning that we have to provide all those conditions as to under which this standard will be applicable, meaning that, well, the user actually needs to engage a qualified person, whether it is certified or designer. I think probably it is, I'm keen to hear some feedback to actually use the like I say, we are trying to we are trying to actually reduce the level of double data entry. So actually, what you need to do, what the BASIX user needs to do, is to enter the name of the house designer, the designer who's going to do the passive house simulation, and the name being put in there will be shown on the BASIX certificate as part of the commitment. And the building certifier, they can actually check with the documentation being provided whether it is actually corresponding to the what is shown on the BASIX certificate, the name of the designer. For example, I just put my name for now. Then throughout the demonstration, you can see that it will show on the certificate, and then the building certifiers can check. Because as part of the requirements, together with the basic certificate, the user or whoever is going to launch a DA or CC or CDs or even OC at the end, they actually need to attach the I would say the results from the software package, especially the verification session of the software package, which is, if I can get out of here in a second, which is probably this page there, as I've shown there. Because I understand that the whole reports from the software, it can run into at least 50 pages. And of course, the building certifiers might not have the time and even the capacity to look at every single page of them. But but we believe that this one, the verification section, probably is the most important one, because it includes all the address details and things like that, who is going to do the actual assessment, and they can actually check the name across with the basic certificate. And also it indicates the performance of the heating, cooling, air tightness, and everything that would actually to demonstrate it satisfies the passive house requirements. So that is the most important page. And then there are a couple of requirements that I would actually elaborate a bit in a second as well. Probably wait until I generate certificate might be the best way to do it. So once they put in there, they click on the next page, which is a bit slow, and then I'm trying to do the it's failing energy for whatever reason. Okay. Well, let me just put in some, because this is a demonstration. So I'm just putting some PV to just get through the system. What I'm trying to do is to generate a certificate there. I'm just looking at that bigger. So that is a sample certificates that you would generate from the system as a result after all the requirements are satisfied. And then, as I mentioned to you, the name of the designer, which is put in on the tool, will appear on the certificate, and the building certifier can check whether the verification page, which is also need to be attached with together with the basic certificate, whether this name match with the name from the verification section of the software. And then there are also commitments dedicated to the passive house standard as well. There's a lot of words, yes, I know. And actually I will come back to the second. I want to show you the energy commitments with the choice of the passive house standard. It is actually appear automatically. The online tool from the project will also show automatically that the ventilation of the proposed home, you must install that mechanical ventilation system with heat recovery. And that applies for the entire house, not just for kitchen, laundry, and bathrooms, like an ordinary house in BASIX. If you choose a passive house standard option, these commitments and these requirements will appear automatically. And that would save you the trouble of actually having to select on continuous operation for the ventilation system, which might not be the best option, right? Okay, so, and I will also mention to you that there's actually a dedicated page from our BASIX help notes, which is actually linked to the online tool, which provides a bit of explanation of the passive house standard method and the requirements and things like that, which I'm actually covering in this webinar. So I think it will provide both you as practitioners or your clients and users with the general information that you need about BASIX, passive house standard in BASIX. So let me go through, because that's the process that is required from the practitioners or BASIX users to select the passive house standard in BASIX, at least for the single detached homes for now. So I might just stop for this moment whether there are actually questions that that I can answer at this point. If not, I will proceed to the requirements section. What is actually required in terms of compliance? Okay, probably I will go on the requirements. So, like I mentioned earlier, that the reports from the passive house software, rather than actually providing them for the building certifiers with 50 odd pages or whatever, or even more, we would like to focus that verification section of the outputs, which is where the building certifiers can actually focus on to check whether or to check the compliance when the user actually selects the passive house option. And what exactly they need to check, from that page, is actually apart from those address details, the name of the certifiers I mentioned. Essentially, one of those things is to check that the space heating, space cooling, and the air tightness satisfies the passive house standard, the criteria for passive house standard. Because, like I say, the recognition of the standard in BASIX is mostly focusing on the thermal comfort section. Yes, I understand that the passive house standard actually looks into other areas such as energy, the primary energy, and things like that. But for the time being, I think at least we are focusing on the thermal comfort side of things, the heating, cooling load, and air tightness. And apart from the I would say the verification page from the passive house software package, we actually want to, as part of the BASIX certificate, we actually require the certified passive house practitioner. Again, whether it is a certifier or designer, is probably we are open to comments, to provide a written endorsement. Endorsing what? Endorsing that actually the assessments using the passive house software package is based on the plans and documentation provided or attached as part of the DA. Just want to make sure that what it is actually modeled is actually the plan being put forward. Otherwise, we want to make sure that there's certain kind of consistency, and of course, if the plans being submitted are different from the settings or the assumptions or the inputs being put into the passive house assessments, obviously the benefits from the passive house might not be realized. And of course, we want to make sure that the passive house certification can only be obtained, probably not just passive house certification, but the certification through the development application process can be obtained when the construction is done according to the plans. And as I mentioned earlier, any changes from the plans, of course, will have an effect on the outcomes from the passive house software package. So we want to make sure that any changes of the plans, we might not compromise on the benefits that a passive house standard would bring. So that's why we want to have that written endorsement to make sure that the plan and the assessments are consistent. And I think the more importantly, obviously, everyone, of course, the most important issue is to get an OC, occupation certificates from their proposed home after all the work and all the time they spent on it. And for OC, what we actually require is actually results from the on-site blow door testing conducted by those registered testers. One of those association I'm aware of is there, and there's a link to those as well. And of course, the on-site blow door test needs to achieve the air tightness requirements from the passive house standard. And as I mentioned earlier, we would like, of course, we would actually require the mechanical ventilation with heat recovery to be installed on site as part of the plan. And of course, one of the questions that Andy and our team has been looked at when we are trying to work out how to recognize passive house standard in BASIX is that do we actually want to have the proper passive house certification to be done before as a prerequisite for the occupation certificate? And of course, the issue at hand is probably about whether that requirement will delay, I would say, the householders of getting OC, and then they can then move in. And my understanding is that there might be some time delay before that certification can be done for whatever paperwork and process that the passive house standard requires. Then I think, of course, the last thing that we want is actually your clients ringing up, or you yourself ringing up to your to our help desk or our customer service, screaming at our customer service people of actually trying to get you or your client the OC. So I think, but having said that, I think that is the major concern that we had, and that is why we do not necessarily need to ask for the proper passive house certification as a prerequisite for OC, but at the very least, they need to actually undertake, have a kind of on-site blower door test undertaken, and the results obtained, the evidence being shown to the building certifier to get the occupation certificate. And that is probably these are the quite streamlined requirements that we have in relation to compliance as well. Essentially, it is just assessments, complying with the plans, provided documents which is consistent with the assessments through the DA process before OC, and of course any changes along the way for construction certificates and all, probably those changes needs to be updated as well in both the documentation and the passive house assessments. And before OC, make sure the on-site blower door test is done and the results being submitted. Probably that would be the requirements needed. And also, of course, the mechanical ventilation with heat recovery being installed. Like I say, we are still, a bit of a work in progress. There's also the second stage to roll out the passive house standard to apply to apartment buildings. In the meantime, we would like to see feedback as to, because I explained to you the process, say the user needs to make sure that they have a proper certified passive house designer engaged. And then I think the current commitment states that the certified designer needs to provide a written endorsement. And I've also explained to you the process and the requirements. These process and requirements, I would say, fit for purpose to you guys as practitioners. Whether to be specific, one of those examples, whether it is the certifier who needs to actually provide the endorsement, or whether that designer would be sufficient. So all these comments will be welcome, and it will be good to consider them as we do the second stage rollout at the same time. And then, and actually, it is one of those I would say feedback that we would like to gather, not so much for the second stage, but probably down the track, is about how the thermal loads, heating and cooling loads in passive house, how are the thermal loads could be actually bring forward to the energy section of BASIX. currently, because as you have seen just now, we didn't ask the users to put in the heating and cooling load requirements from the BASIX online tool, just the name of the designer. So the current approach, because I understand that the heating cooling load in passive house is different from the NatHERS heating cooling loads. So if we actually ask, and all the subsequent calculations in the energy section about the heating and cooling energy use from your air conditioners, or even if you don't have any heating cooling energy devices, the current calculations are based on NatHERS loads. So and thanks for the technical work that Andy has done, and his team as well. I think he has also published the relevant technical information online. Is that we have established that, hey, actually, based on a number of homes that we looked at, the heating and cooling loads satisfying the, well, for those house designs satisfying the passive house standards, the equivalent, NatHERS heating and cooling loads are lower than actually the caps, the heating and cooling caps, which are requirements in BASIX. I think there's probably at least 20% and things like that. But of course, it is based on a certain type of house designs and certain locations. We would actually like to gather more information, more evidence as to what is the exact, well, not so much of an exact, but gather more evidence as to the difference between the NatHERS loads from a passive house than a non-passive house, for example, so that we can account for that properly in our calculations. Currently, we are just carrying forward the caps, the heating cooling caps from BASIX to the energy calculations in BASIX. Say, heating cooling caps 50, for example, then 50 megajoules per square meter per year. That number will be used in the calculations of the energy score. Yes, I understand this is shortchanging the benefits of passive house, and that's why we are actually keen to gather more evidence. Of course, Andy's work provides quite some evidence, but we would like to actually look into them in more detail. So this is one. Another one is, of course, as I mentioned, Andy's work has compared the heating and cooling loads from passive house with the current BASIX requirements. And we all know that, yes, we all know that it is, the numbers themselves probably is less than 6 stars NatHERS, but the benefits actually, because of the split heating cooling caps, the outcomes on average is 6 stars, all those kinds of things. And as lots of a lot of conversations has been happening about increasing the stringency to NatHERS 7 stars, and we are actually working with the ABCB office and the NatHERS administrator to evaluate or investigate whether BASIX thermal comfort requirements can move to 7 stars as well. So in the event that we are going to increase the stringency in 2022 to be consistent with the other states and territories, then we would need to know whether that, say a passive house, the equivalent NatHERS loads from a passive house, how they compare with the 7 stars requirements, and then to what extent that would affect the energy calculations of BASIX, whether we would carry the caps across to the energy section, given that the caps are equivalent to 7 stars, or whether we still need to discount some of the certain percentage from the caps, and then use the discounted values to carry forward to the energy section. So this is something, again, in the context of 7 stars, we would like to seek some feedback from you guys as the industry as well. So I think that is for me about passive house, the process, the requirements, what we are keen to actually seek feedback on. And this is my contact details, my email address. If you have any feedback questions, of course, I'm sure the Passive House Association can be more than happy to collate those I would say feedback and questions from members and practitioners. Alternatively, you can also send me an email for any questions about passive housing basics in general. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. And I will probably give it back to Andy to see whether we have any questions. Thanks. Andy, back to you.
Hey, okay. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Kevin. That was incredibly insightful and useful. Believe it or not, right now, we don't actually have any questions, which is normally the sign of a fantastic presentation that covered everything that needed to be covered. So I guess unless anybody does pipe up, which will give them a moment or two to think through, but I really think you covered the pragmatics of the changes that are flowing through. I guess on my only comment, you mentioned about the need for the designer or certifier to sort of put to verify their sort of work, so to speak.
Yep.
That we created a template letter. Is that available to people easily? Should they contact the help desk for that, or should they just create their own?
I think yes. I think that's a good question. We would the template is currently not available from the BASIX website. Put simply. I think we could. I think there are a couple of channels to distribute that. One is actually we would try to upload that web template into our website in the help notes that I showed you earlier. I think it is something that we would need to organize from our end. It is not just click like that. So in the meantime, I think either you can contact our help desk, and I'm happy for if your members or practitioners put that email. I think I could actually because there's a dedicated help desk email for BASIX. We could actually probably I can leave it there as a message as well. Then if that email can bring it to my attention, then it will come to me straight away, and I can then attach that template in reply. That is the second pathway. The third pathway is whether the passive house organization can also help distribute that the template as well. That would be fantastic to make sure that we cover all the bases, especially for those who are not able to attend this, I would say, webinar. So I think that there are a couple of ways to address that. Yeah, and I'll put I would say the email for the BASIX help desk here as well.
Oh, fantastic. We're recording the webinar, so unless you have objections, we'll post that so people will be able to access this later on so they can revisit what you've said today. Yep. I'll check that out with you later. I have just realized that I, for whatever reason, cannot see the questions, but thank you to Kylie who's just texted me then. Will an APHA certificate be required as part of the evidence?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Will the APHA certificate, the Air Tightness and Testing Measurement Association certificate be required? I think you have covered that, but
yes, because if that certification covers the I would say the blower doors testing results, yes, then they need to be provided for the purpose of applying for the occupation certificate. Yeah.
There is also another question here asking about whether a note could be added to the postcode entry section at the start of BASIX in relation to the climate data will need to be sourced through their certified designer, as this is not automatically. I think from that, I think just from what I understand, those kind of things need to be addressed in the feedback to Kevin and the team for changes for later. In terms of any change to the sort of the structure of how it works, and also into the change of any of the wording on the website itself.
Well, I think the question, of course, is about whether we would like to make the postcodes available, whether it is a spreadsheet or whatever is being made available in the help notes that I mentioned, so that people can just check directly without actually resorting to ending up facing with a cross or grayed out button. Well, I think that there are a couple of issues. While of course we want to improve the transparency by providing that information. At the same time, if there are additional, say, climate files being sought by, say, among the passive house community, then that means we need to be updated. Otherwise, we will come into the situation our list will become outdated. There might be, as time goes, there might be additional climate files being available and additional postcodes being able to be used. So if we are not updated, regularly, then that means we'll risk that information being outdated and being some kind of misleading some section of the community as well. So yeah, I think while we are happy to make that information available, but at the same time, I think I'm thinking about not just now, but then as an ongoing basis, how frequently we need updated, and then to what extent that I would say those information will be available to us.
Cool. Okay, thank you. I'm unaware of any other questions. I can't see any. Sam, if you are there and you can see others, please jump in.
No, not on my end.
Okay, no worries. In which case, I'll take the opportunity to thank Kevin for both today, but also for the work over quite a long period of time making this happen. As with all change, it's not quick, but like I said, APHA are extremely pleased that we've gotten this far. And I guess we're very keen to make sure that people actually use this pathway for compliance. If it's not well used, then we may struggle to get the changes to class 2 to flow through and the other things that we're trying to get done. So I guess it's in everybody's court to do their part now by using this system. And please do give the feedback to Kevin and the BASIX team. They're genuinely trying to make this as good and as smooth as it can be. Yes, we need to make sure that these buildings, comply and do all the right things. But the easier we can make that, the better. And if we can make passive house the easiest way to build buildings in New South Wales, then that would be good for all of us. So on that note, Kevin, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone else, and have a beautiful afternoon.
Thanks for having me. Thank you. And good afternoon.